woman, she now has to do it real style, right? Like she has to do the laundry, she has to.
As a woman in the 1800s, you'd have a fair chance of going to work in a factory every day. These so-called tradwives and the people who critique them are often both operating from the same fallacious presumptions. Women who call themselves tradwives will argue that we're just returning to the past where it was the norm for women to do domestic labor. And the people who call them out often say, yes, but look, feminism fought for so much, you're glorifying something that was actually a horrible situation for women. And that last point is true, but it's not the whole picture. Because while the women who were relegated to the domestic sphere in the 19th and 20th centuries did experience horrible things, this was a small subset of women in the first place who were privileged and lived in the Western world. So this premise that women in the past just worked domestically is extrapolating the experiences of a select few and assuming that all women had this experience. It's lazy history because it only focuses on a small percentage of women. And I think both tradwives and their most ardent critics fall into this trap. The present-day concept of a housewife is a modern concept, because the reality is that most women in the world throughout history have worked a variety of jobs, had a variety of rights, varying levels of agency and ability based on the intersectional aspects of their existence. When Western women got the right to have their own bank accounts in the 20th century, that was not the first time women in the world or even in the West have had the ability to control their wealth. So I have the same critique for both tradwives and their outspoken critics. Stop acting like history started in the 1950s, because that's where you're all anchoring the word traditional. Not to mention, a lot of people in the 1950s had to work. I also think there's this tendency for people on either side of the tradwife discussion to box women into these very black and white categories that aren't really representative of real humans. Oh, I'm a tradwife, not a career woman. I actually love my family. Or I'm a feminist, so I go to work. It's actually possible to be a nuanced human, and I think a lot of y'all in the tradwife discourse make women out to be one-dimensional. Women have always worked for all of history, all over the world. Instead of arguing that women never worked and now they do, and that's either good or bad depending on how I see this tradwife situation, let's analyze women's working experiences across time and space, because it's not a linear line and we've reached the pinnacle of women's working experience today and in the past it was horrible. It's more like up and down as you go, because that's how history works. And anyone who thinks women are actually equal in the workplace today, with the knowledge that women have always worked, we should ask questions like, how has women's ability to have a career changed over time and space? How have women been protected or not in the workplace? Has women's work been appreciated and fairly compensated over time and space? How do these questions apply to our present day situation? Let's also not forget that domestic labor is important, valuable labor. There is nothing wrong in performing domestic labor. It's absolutely necessary in the world. The problem is when we romanticize a fake past. I think that my critique that tradwives and most people in their discourse are operating on a flawed premise is more useful than the people who criticize them by buying into the same fallacies they espouse in the first place.